All right, serious now.
Well, we're at 5, but I think we should wait just a handful of minutes.
Okay.
We do know that there's one event finishing up that I imagine there'll be a couple of students and maybe faculty who want to join from there, and there's one member from that other meeting, and we can't really start without Jacob toasting the opening, so just give folks a few moments. But which Zoom let you be more in control of how big the matrix is in terms, so you could fit lots of people, like all 50 or whatever, if you wanted.
Oh, I think that the host can do that.
Really?
Right, Jacob? Is that true? Like that the host can change the number of people that are visible?
Oh, like you can turn on their cameras?
No, sorry, that are in the grid, so that it doesn't like go into multiple pages or multiple.
Oh, I'm not sure.
Like I think there's a way to get like all, whatever, 30 people on the screen at once.
Well, that will be my task for next week because I'm not seeing it right away.
I did make you
Yeah, a host. Yeah, I saw that. Huh?
Oh, cool.
Is that other meeting finishing up?
Yes.
Cool.
I just like brutally jumped off to join this one.
Quite yet.
People are
Not quite.
yet. They're almost there.
Jacob, do we want to give them another minute or two?
I mean, it's up to you, but I think it's okay to start.
Okay,
I'm
I think
recording, so.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so let's start, and I'll just do a really brief introduction. We are here at Professional Confessionals with myself, Sharon Haar, Professor of Architecture, as moderator, and our guest today, Cyrus Penarroyo, who is going to share with us a mix of his professional work and his confessions around it. Yeah, we're in the first week of August, kind of skiing down towards the start of school, but want to stay in the sort of summer modality of joy and fresh air and sunshine and exploration and openness to new ideas. So with that, we're going to keep things somewhat casual and open. But just to start, I'm going to introduce Cyrus, who just shamelessly stolen from his profile on the Taubman College website, which is so helpful for this. Cyrus is a Filipino-American designer and an assistant professor at Taubman College. He first arrived here in Ann Arbor as the Muschenheim Fellow in 2015-2016. Cyrus's work examines architecture's entanglement with contemporary media and digital culture, and more specifically, his research investigates the urbanity of the internet, how network technologies shape urbanization, and how media spheres influence built environments. And I know that this is precisely what he's going to be speaking with us about today, and I couldn't be more excited about at least what he's mentioned, the kind of linkages between the specific work he's doing and many of the conversations that are taking place in the college today, including the one I just stepped out of on community engagement and where we might move with that within the college as a whole. Cyrus has won numerous awards and participated in quite a number of exhibitions for a young academic. Among them, I won't list them all, he was awarded the 2019 Architectural League Prize. And he's also won an ACSA Faculty Design Award honorable mention. And I'm sure, as many of you know, he is a partner in the design practice Extents with McLean Clutter. What brings us here this evening is one of 4 events. This is the second of the 4 that is being hosted by the Taubman College Public Design Corps, which is working in partnership this summer with Edward Ginsburg Center at University of Michigan and multiple nonprofit community organizations around Southeast Michigan and Detroit. It's a list that seems to be growing by the day. Just to give those of you who may not, I know that many who are here in this Zoom are participating in Public Design Corps, but for those of you who are not yet, Taubman College Public Design Corps seeks to present University of Michigan students with the opportunity to engage in socially driven design with kind of 5 goals in mind. The first is to broaden design's positive social impact. Essentially through number 2, helping students apply their architectural skills in design and spatial intelligence to projects guided by principles of equity and inclusion. To augment student and faculty, for that matter's understanding of the importance of community engagement in socially driven design, to provide students with the tools and methods to engage others in the design process. Something that I think is really truly important is how to learn how to do this work and how to participate in its growth by adding to that knowledge. And finally, and probably most importantly, to assist community partners in spatializing and advancing their public missions. In addition to the, as I understand it, 20 to 30 students who are engaged in this enterprise right now, we have quite a number of faculty engaged in it as well, some of whom are here with us now in 35, wow, cool. Including but not limited to Maria Arcaro, Julia McMurrow, Lars Junghans, Irene Wang, Anya Sirota, Jacob Comerci, Mark Norman, Ana Paula Pimentel-Walker, Gina Reichert, Anna Martillo Pilares, and Cyrus Penarroyo himself. I am just going to kick this off with one confessional of my own, which is not to date myself or age myself, although I'm already clearly aging myself by the day. I first got to know Cyrus when he was an undergraduate at University of Illinois at Chicago, and I was teaching there. Jacob as well, but that was after that. But first Cyrus and then Jacob. Tell anyone. I remember this guy from a long time ago, so I like seeing where the work's headed. And with that, I'm just going to turn it over to Cyrus.
Thanks, Sharon. Thanks for the introduction. And yeah, thanks to Anya and Jacob for inviting me. I'm happy to be here and to get this chance to share this work. I'm going to just share my screen really quick. Okay, can everyone see the slideshow?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, great. So I too, I'm going to start with a confession. I'm fairly new to community engaged work and public scholarship. I've always been interested in how architecture interfaces with the public. I would say this is a big part of my interest in contemporary media and digital culture. But it's not until recently that I have been working on projects that involve collaborating or co-designing with non-architects. And for this presentation, and I'm hoping that this can be more of an informal conversation, so feel free to interrupt if you have any questions. I'll spend just a few minutes introducing my practice, which I think will help frame my approach to public scholarship, And then I'll spend the majority of the time talking about the project that I'm currently working on. And we're very much in the middle of this project called Network Structures, Buildings, Publics, and the Internet. I'll provide some background on the project, some background information, how it came to be. I'll discuss lessons learned and challenges that remain. And then I'll end with a Q&A. And actually, I want to end with a question for the group. And I actually want to use this as an opportunity to solicit feedback on this project as we're kind of continuing to work on it. So to begin, Extents. So as Sharon mentioned, I run a practice called Extents with McLean Clutter. Extents is a design collaborative that operates across scales and disciplinary silos. We're interested in architecture, urbanism, media, digital culture, and other instruments of life that can be impacted by design. And central to our practice is a commitment to architecture's role as a medium of public life, progressive culture, and what we're saying is uncommon sense. We aspire to make work that cultivates alteric forms of collectivity, new forms of excess, unconventional tectonic assemblies that suggest alternative material cultures, and other ways of being. And we built up our practice through a combination of grant-funded research projects, design competitions, and commissions. And I didn't want to use today's session to present a lot of different projects. If you're interested, feel free to check out our website. But in the spirit of Confessions, I did want to quickly mention just 2 public-facing projects of ours and some of the challenges that we ran into with both. So on the left is Lossy Lossless, a temporary environment for a nonprofit arts organization called Materials and Applications in Los Angeles. The project uses a public storefront space as a site through which to vivify the changing urban image of the surrounding neighborhood. And we sought to provide a forum for the discussion of the politics and stakes around Echo Park's gentrification and the role that arts organizations like M&A play in that process. And then on the right is Collective Reality, Image Without Ownership, which is an interactive augmented reality project that allows citizens to engage in conversations about urban development by creating images of possible neighborhood futures. Conventional urban development requires the expenditure of capital and significant resources, which doubles the privilege of wealth with the exclusive ability to imagine the future. And our app in this project is meant to be a community design tool that decouples wealth and imagination in order to empower citizens from all socioeconomic backgrounds. And so what we created in that project was essentially a laboratory, also in a storefront, for the development of this software in dialogue with community members. And this was a collaboration with Lyda Aguirre and Mark Lindquist from Seas. And in both projects, we worked with nonprofits. M&A commissioned us to do the installation on the left for their new space. And then for Collective Reality on the right, we partnered with Land Studio, who focuses on public art and landscape in Cleveland, and who have a pre-existing relationship with Slavic Village, which was the site that was chosen for this project. And since both orgs have experience with public programming, we were really looking to them for help with bringing in community members, since we weren't trained in those skills and aren't from either city. However, I'll confess, another confession, that the turnout for both of these projects was not what we had hoped. M&A, I think with M&A, it was really a kind of combination of unforeseen challenges with a new space. You know, they hadn't been in the space. We were the first occupants, and I think that there were unforeseen restrictions with how to program it, use it, but also the kind of time and turnaround for the projects. And I think with Land Studio, I think I think it would have been better actually if we had the software ready to go before partnering with them to be able to show them what it does. Because I think the challenge that we ran into was just finding a way to communicate clearly, what the project could do without actually having it in hand, and being able to communicate that those intentions to non-architects. I also think that, to be honest, I think that the academic calendar, and I also think academia's insistence on product over process, I think, sometimes hinders projects, and especially in both of these cases, I think affected the way that we produced work and sort of went about the process. I think that if we had more time to cultivate relationships and build trust, I think we might have had better outcomes. And so, I would say that with these two projects, there are definitely aspects of them that failed, but we definitely also learned from them. And I think both of these experiences have definitely shaped how I approach public engaged work now. So this brings me to the focus of my talk today, which is the project Network Structures. And Network Structures seeks to co-develop with community members prototypical adaptive reuse strategies for converting a disused and abandoned school in Detroit into an anchor institution within a mesh network that could strengthen internet connectivity and other critical social infrastructures. And so just to say a little bit about what a mesh network is, distinct from traditional hub and spoke internet networks, mesh networks interconnect distributed fields of routers, leveraging the bandwidths of multiple points of internet connectivity to create broad territories of wireless access. So in other words, meshes replace a single access point with many access points. So just looking at the diagram on the left, that's a traditional hub and spoke. The next diagram to the right of it is the mesh. And so these municipally subsidized networks would decrease dependency on top-down internet service provision and allow community members to have more control over their data and online experiences. And the diagram on the far right shows how anchor institutions like libraries and schools help to redistribute wireless signal to nearby houses. And the Detroit Community Technology Project, with their Equitable Internet Initiative, is working to establish community-driven mesh networks throughout the city. And there are examples of similar meshes all over the world by groups that have published how-to or DIY guides online. And with all of the conversations happening around quote unquote smart cities, I became really interested in these grassroots efforts to build a separate internet, because I like imagining that there could be another way to conceive of urban life that doesn't involve optimization, increased surveillance, or increased data mining. And the assumption that those things are all better, and that we as architects could be more conscious of this when we design. And more broadly, I think this project expands conversations happening within the digital humanities around the social and ethical implications of technology within the multidisciplinary milieu of contemporary urbanism. So for example, how one's identity is shaped by their access to the internet. I'm also thinking about people like Ruha Benjamin and the new Jim Code and algorithmic bias, or Andre Brock Jr. and Black cyberculture. And I think this work is definitely kind of in dialogue, or even more so following their work. Just to give a little bit of background, the research began in fall 2018 as a mapping and design project funded by the Michigan Mellon Project on the Egalitarian Metropolis. And I won't go into this chapter of the research, but you can find a lot more information on this work online. I want to really just focus on the current version of this work. But in fall 2019, thanks to a Prototyping Tomorrow grant, that research evolved into a collaboration between faculty and graduate research assistants from Taubman College and the University of Michigan Digital Studies Institute and the City of Detroit Department of Innovation and Technology. And over the course of the project, the team has expanded and contracted to include community members, engineers, planners, consultants, and others as the project advances and becomes more complex. And in a way, there's a core team, but also the understanding that the collaboration is fluid and that the team kind of grows and shrinks as the work advances. And the U of M team members have been learning a lot about the ever-changing ecosystem of the city from Joshua Edmonds, the City of Detroit Director of Digital Inclusion, and our partner on this project. The City of Detroit defines digital inclusion as, quote, an active process of equitably including residents and organizations into the technological ecosystem, end quote. And according to the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, or the NDIA, digital equity is, quote, a condition in which all individuals and communities have the information technology capacity needed for participation in our society, democracy, and economy. Digital equity is necessary for civic and cultural participation, employment, lifelong learning, and access to essential services, end quote. And in his 2 years, in Joshua's 2 years as director, he has been meeting with many different organizations, community groups, and stakeholders, and trying to make connections between groups that could support his goal of creating a more inclusive digital ecosystem. And stemming from our conversations with Joshua, we started mapping what's called digital distress across Detroit's neighborhoods and searching for possible sites to engage. According to Robert Gallardo, Assistant Director of the Purdue Center for Regional Development, digital distress areas have a harder time using and leveraging the internet to improve their quality of life due to the type of internet subscription or devices owned. Digital distress is defined here as census tracts or neighborhoods that have a high percent of homes not subscribing to the internet or subscribing online through a cellular data plan, and two, a high percent of homes with no community devices or relying on only mobile devices, end quote. And Roberto actually helped us create this map of Detroit that you're looking at on the screen. And with his formula, he identified the areas in the city that are in digital distress, which are shown in pink. And our initial project proposal included closed schools and abandoned police precincts as potential sites, but for multiple reasons, which I can get into, we decided to focus on religious institutions. According to Joshua, churches are strategically located within neighborhoods. They have space for trainings and computer labs, and they already partner with a range of community organizations as part of their kind of mission. So in February of this year, 2020, Joshua eventually connected us to David Underwood from the Detroit Community Care Network, which is a faith-based organization supporting health and well-being throughout the city. And we started discussions about how one of the churches in their network, Third New Hope, which we see here in the Google Street View, could enhance its outreach by providing public Wi-Fi and technology and other socio-spatial programming. So just to say a bit about Third New Hope, they're located in the Pride neighborhood of Detroit in District 7, just south of I-96 and bounded by Plymouth, Myers, and Schaefer. And the church has many programs, including youth ministry and Bible study. They host Gleaners Community Food Bank. They have programming for and support for formerly incarcerated folks. And they also have block group meetings within the church. We were also struck by Third New Hope's online presence. Before the pandemic, they were already live streaming their services, and they just recently more recently they have a new pastor, Pastor Q, who's a young pastor that actually really likes to use technology to reach younger people and encourage them to be involved in fellowship. And so when we met with DCCN, they asked us for our help to actually envision a new community center from the ground up on an adjacent lot to the church. And so we agreed to actually take the proposal and conduct a feasibility study for this project to help them secure additional funding. And in March, we were prepared to issue a survey to their congregation members that would help us understand their needs and wants. But COVID-19 forced us to put those conversations on hold until May. In the meantime, I participated in the Mellon Public Engagement and the Humanities program, which definitely prepared me to have conversations with community members. And also, through that program, was able to have interactions with the Ginsburg Center. During this time, also, David provided us with the 2018 Detroit Community Health Assessment Reports, in which many members of his church participated and provided data. And based on this report, our team was able to create a new questionnaire for conversations we've been having, that we've been having now for the past couple weeks. Or sorry, not couple weeks, the past few months. So just to say a bit about where the project stands now and where we see it going from this point forward, here's a view of the site. In the latest version of the project, we're still co-designing a community center with DCCN and Third New Hope, but our attention has shifted to conducting a feasibility study for renovating a closed school across the street. And the feasibility study is the anticipated outcome for at least this phase of the project. So you can see Third New Hope there in the middle of the screen. The empty lot just to the northwest of the church was a site that they had plans to develop into a community center. They wanted us to look into that site, but then after after May came around, they actually wanted us to think about these two schools, the Oakman Elementary School and the George Parker Elementary School, as possible sites for this facility, the space. And so, yeah, DCCN suggested that the building accommodate technology, health services, creative arts, and small business supports. But they also seemed very open to additional programming. And this was all coming from our initial, our moment of reconnection with them back in May, once school was over, and also I think we all had a kind of handling of our own kind of relationship to the pandemic. And so, yeah, in May, we reconnected with David. And as a first step, we started meetings with various members of the community, which he facilitated, to just learn more about the neighborhood and the members of the church, other members of the church. And from Third New Hope, we met with various ministry leaders, trustees, the pastor, and staff members. We also met with the president of a nearby community association, the president of the block group, the District 7 manager, and a few people who live in the neighborhood or have family living in the neighborhood currently. And because of the pandemic, we've been forced to have these meetings over Zoom. I mean, the church isn't even having in-person service. So I think the idea of meeting with them in person, I think, has seemed less likely. And we've recorded these conversations, created transcripts, which you see here. And then from those transcripts, started pulling out comments that could help us think through some design sketches. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about process, because we're very early in this process. I think one of the challenges right now is just how to figure out how to co-design during a pandemic. I think typically we would do this in person through probably a series of design workshops and public forums. But now I think, since we're all online, I think our intent is to create a process where we can listen to the community and then use our skills as designers to translate those ideas and concepts into images, and then bring those images back to the community for additional conversation and feedback, and ultimately just create this back and forth process that really has to happen online as opposed to in person. Also, I think something that's affecting our progress is we're still waiting for documentation on the two schools, so we don't have plan drawings at the moment. So our process is really driven by creating perspective images, perspective renderings, just to start. And it's also, I think, one of the easiest ways for us as designers to communicate our intentions, because I think perspective images are just, I think they're easier to sort of read and interpret and understand. And I think what we're using to create these is the sort of basic dimensions of a classroom, which is about 30 to 40 feet, 30 feet by 40 feet. And so using surface applied conduit, vinyl, acoustic foam, and a mix of custom and off-the-shelf millwork and furniture, we're testing different ways to weave together social infrastructure and digital infrastructure, keeping in mind what seems financially feasible for an adaptive reuse project. And also, as you can see in this image, taking into account quotes that were mentioned or that were stated during the interview process. So we're literally kind of like using things that were discussed in our conversations as the kind of driver for a lot of these design iterations. And these sketches are very preliminary. So these are very fresh. And they are really just a way for us to understand what different community members might like and what they might respond to more. And I think in terms of, as you'll see, as I advance the slides, I think we're experimenting a lot with color and materiality, and I think we're taking inspiration from the energy and the vibrancy of Third New Hope services and online presence. So I think we're pulling the kind of sensibility, the colors, the kind of energy from their own sort of social media presence. So just to kind of run through these really quickly, we're in these sketches, I think, taking different approaches to zoning and degrees of custom fabrication versus off-the-shelf pieces, and also thinking about how we could open up interiors so that they sort of extend out to exterior spaces. And with all of these renderings, thinking about ways that people could assemble around accessing technology, accessing devices and the internet. And so the zoning here, for instance, is like meant to be, ways of signifying where people could gather or might gather without having to introduce walls or other partitions. Just another shot here. You can see the kind of conduit playing a bigger role in the kind of graphic quality or the visual quality of the space. And then just a few other slides that show kind of different iterations. And we're also thinking about ways in which these spaces could be designed to disconnect. So thinking about how internet connection might bring people together, but also there might be moments in the building where you actually want to get off of a device, and how could we design that so that Wi-Fi accessibility or internet accessibility is actually not promoted, and that you can actually get off of your computer or your phone. So now, we're in the next phase. We've shown these images to David, and he's super excited about them. We're now very much in conversation with actually a family member of his who's a planner, and we're also still waiting on drawings. And he's helping to facilitate the next phase, which is showing these images to the broader Third New Hope community and also the community around the church. And doing that through social media, since we're in this kind of pandemic moment. And because Third New Hope is very active on Facebook, we thought it might be a good idea to actually use their Facebook to solicit feedback, and using things like the like feature or the comment features to receive suggestions. And also, through our conversations and through our analysis of some of the kind of internet data, it's clear that a lot of people that we're talking to actually access the internet through their phones, and so and through their mobile devices. And so, here's a version where we can imagine people viewing multiple options of the same space, using their phone, using the polling feature in Facebook to figure out which version people respond to more, and then they could vote between the versions, make suggestions, and then we can continue this process of reposting images and keeping them a part of this the design. And so this is the phase that we're entering, and this is also what I would like to receive feedback on when I get to the end of this presentation. So I'll come back to this. So moving forward, our next steps include having more conversations with community members to help us understand their programming needs, creating a more comprehensive schedule or action plan. That's something that we've started to do, and I think it's constantly kind of being reworked. We need to begin a site survey and documentation of the closed schools that we want to work with. And then, really try to develop more co-designing techniques that comply with public health guidelines. That's really been the biggest challenge in this project, because I feel like a lot of this would be easier if we could meet in a large group and have public forums or kind of co-designing workshops. And so I think we're having to be a little bit more creative about how to make sure they're part of the process. We're also trying to think through the financial mechanisms that could make this project possible as part of the feasibility study, and then continuing the co-design process. Just to say a bit about lessons and insights that have been gained through this project and what challenges remain. I think since architects are used to client-based project delivery models, and design research tends to be more product focused, I think that this project and also in particular the Mellon Public Engagement Program and my interactions with the Ginsberg Center and other public engagement folks actually provided me with a framework that's rarely part of an architect's education. I think for me, at least, it wasn't a big part of mine. And also part of this process has involved learning how to design with as opposed to design for. and how to navigate multiple timelines or interests and difficult conversations with community partners. And like I mentioned before, I think academic calendars and funding cycles, I think present challenges, and so I think that the Mellon Public Engagement Program, I think, really helped me try to understand how to navigate that. The pandemic and the strain that it has put on our digital infrastructure has made my team's conversations with DCCN harder to have and even more relevant to address. On a practical level, like I mentioned, we've run into challenges speaking with residents and churchgoers due to uneven internet access, which is the very issue that this project is addressing. And we're trying to think of other ways besides the phone for interaction. I think also doing this work takes time, especially since we want to develop a long-term relationship with this community. And until recently, the meetings with DCCN have been few and far between over the last few months. I think because all of us have been trying to figure out how to be in the world during this pandemic, during this really kind of complicated time, and it's hard to know sometimes what to work on without hearing from members of the community first. And I think for us in this project, we really don't want to design anything prematurely. And so it's really about sort of making space to listen and then creating things that are motivated by the conversations. And I think that we weren't able to have those conversations until a lot more recently. And then lastly, it's also been challenging for us at times to clarify our roles and agree on expectations from both sides. I think it's clear that DCCN has their goals for this project, and for us as another confession, we were sort of in the right place at the right time. I think Joshua sort of linked us with David at a very at kind of the right moment, and just as they needed a designer, and so. I think for us, this partnership is very new, and we're still working through the group dynamics. And then, just another thing I think that's worth mentioning is that while waiting this spring for the project to resume, I did further develop the research through other public channels, just to talk about other ways to think about public scholarship for a moment. So I was interviewed by the Detroit Free Press. I also was asked to write an op-ed for the Architect's newspaper. I think in both of those cases, in terms of public engagement work, the timelines are just very different. And I think part of the work also could entail writing and just continuing to develop these ideas through other formats. And so, things like conferences, things like paper, newspapers. I think in particular, writing for news outlets or more public-facing publications, I think is also a way to just help build an audience and to get more people interested in and invested in these issues. So as the project moves forward, I actually could use some feedback on the next stage, and this is where I'd like to end. I think interacting, as I mentioned before, interacting with members of the New Hope has been wonderful, but also challenging because of the pandemic. And so I welcome ideas for co-design sessions and how to build trust with the community during a pandemic. If you want to hold community design workshops, but have to maintain social distancing, what are some ways that we can involve members in the design process? How can we safely be together apart? And then, what are the other ways that we could interact with each other online? I welcome any ideas that you all have. So with that, I'll end there.
Thanks, Cyrus. That was really great. Since you're engaging questions, you're asking for questions and comments, sort of rather than my jumping in with a few, I think it would just be really terrific if for those, Jacob has a suggestion, for Jacob has an idea, but also for folks to type into the chat or raise their hands through the participants panel. But Jacob's made a suggestion, which I think would be really helpful as a way of kind of kicking off the conversation around this work. Would be for those, I'm going to read it out. I think it would be great for those participating in Taubman Public Design Corps to speak about the ways in which you've engaged with your community partners, since, of course, the entire enterprise has been done online. And I have to say, when I first heard about this enterprise and sort of thought about getting it going at this particular moment in time, I was thinking, wow, of all the times to get a public design corps initiated, this one's the most challenging. So I'm sure that the students themselves probably have some thoughts on co-designing through digital platforms with communities and partners who may or may not have the bandwidth to engage these processes and might have some ideas. So I'm gonna turn it over. There might also be some community partners here joined with us. And I'm all about calling on people if people don't.
I know, I sort of,
I'm going to take put on my teacherly hat and.
Well, I sort of switched up the model. You know, typically these things, it's like I present and like present.
No, this is.
But I'm here to welcome any kind of comments and suggestions. I'm here with questions.
Well, okay, I'm not seeing any. Oh, I have to open the participants to see if anyone's raised their hands. I don't see any yet. But while we're waiting for people to sort of get their egos and together to volunteer some commentary, I guess I want to think a little bit about how you ended. Which was a sort of before the workshopping idea, the notion that this might return itself to the formats and modalities that we as academics, as faculty in particular, are most comfortable in enacting our work within. So disseminating our work through papers and at conferences and publishing, and I think that's one of the venues, but I'm also wondering if you've started to think at all about how you might begin to use other ways of disseminating, interview with Bridge Magazine or Detroit Free Press or others who, get the work out into the public facing world. And then after maybe you think about that and answer that, then I'm going to call on Rebecca, who has her hand raised.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really great question. I think before March, I think I've a big reason why I didn't present the first chapter of this research is because I've been fortunate to present that research a lot throughout in the college and in other conferences, and actually more recently I've been interviewed for the Detroit Free Press. I've given interviews actually for a handful of other like kind of Midwestern like news outlets and other like organizations that are looking to set up actually mesh networks or community mesh networks in other cities, and so I find those conversations to be a lot more fruitful and exciting to have. And I think the ARC newspaper, even though that is an architecture publication or outlet. I would say that that is a newspaper that that at least like feels more. It feels like its audience is a little bit broader than academia, and so I would say that as this project advances, I want to continue to talk about it in those channels as opposed to just writing about it in for academic sources or venues. Yeah, but also I think trying to I mean, again, like this, we're very much in the middle of this project, and so I think as it continues to develop, after every conversation we have with the DCCN or community partners, like I have ideas. I feel like I have like 5 ideas for how to maybe work with the community differently, where it's not just about like design solutions for a problem that they've posed to us, but I think developing other networks of support, like other and I think maybe drawing connections between other resources that might exist on the site, other organizations that I think could help to co-design this project or benefit from this project. And I think it seems like part of this work is also understanding how, as a designer, you can make things, but also you could organize. And I feel like that's part of this process as well, is understanding in what ways we can do both, like in what ways we can create something because they've asked us to envision a project for them, but also imagine the other infrastructure, kind of other social infrastructure that could be kind of reorganized to support the thing that we're designing and the needs of the community.
Rebecca, you want to chime in?
Sure. So thank you, Cyrus, for the great presentation. And it's super interesting, I think, for me to see the sort of way that you've moved from some of the work that you were showing maybe 6 months ago that was a bit more like sort of research-based and like kind of rhetorical in certain ways to something that is, like a real project, right? And I think one of the things that I'm particularly interested in seeing, and this might be something that happens more as the project evolves a bit more, but sort of to what extent some of the more like the conceptual ambition of the project, to what extent does that end up, when it is an actual project, becoming more about like the sort of bare facts of internet access or digital justice, right? Like, especially operating someplace like Detroit, I mean, we can talk about, what digital media means, like at Taubman or in Ann Arbor or whatever, and we have, there's a lot of complexity to that. There's a lot of like theoretical sophistication. But then when you're actually designing a project in Detroit, you're dealing with the reality of like, just like really basic level sort of digital injustice. And I'm wondering, whether it's in your conversations with community members or with the digital director of Detroit, or sort of, just your own thought processes, like how do you navigate between those two things, between like the very theoretical and then like the sort of like basic facts of just people don't have access to the internet? And are there ways that sort of manifests itself in the spatial or material configurations of your project or of the sort of design as it's unfolding?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think that I think it manifests I think in small chunks, like I don't think that we're entering the space wanting to, at least for me, like I don't think I'm entering this space wanting to directly translate a lot of the speculative proposals from that initial chapter research or the kind of bigger ambitions. Like I don't want to take that and apply that to the thinking around this project, because I feel like it's so particular when it comes to site and community. And so I imagine that in the timeline for this project, which I hope is actually a really long timeline, that's about like not just the building or not just the design itself, but actually kind of ways of sustaining the programming within that building. I think that I can imagine a scenario where some of the ideas from that initial sort of phase of research, the ambitions of that, I think, start to make their way into the project through phases as opposed to like all at once, like wholesale. And that I think at this point, I'm really trying to like use this time to listen and make more direct, like I think as a way of building trust, like make more direct sort of like translations of the things that they're saying. And then you know, even in our meeting with David, where we showed these images for the first time, I think his excitement, because he hadn't seen what we could do, I think his excitement, I think, opened up a lot more for us to talk about. And I feel like as we continue to develop the project, show more images, I feel like we can start to marry a lot of the things that they're really invested in when it comes to programming and basic needs when it comes to access to the internet with you know, some alternative ways to think about infrastructure and how people might come together. But I think it has to come in like small bits and pieces as opposed to like all at once. Yeah.
So Ishan had typed something relatively lengthy into the chat, and I've invited him to unmute himself and perhaps just share it with us. Ishan, do you wanna, there he is.
Hey, how's it going, guys? So basically for Taubman Public Design Corps, I did a small project along with Haar for the Car Center in Ypsilanti. And the idea of that was to give them some kind of like idea of how to use their social media. They had no clue on how to like start, and we developed a sort of tutorial for best practice guide. It's really basic stuff, even stuff like just explaining what the hashtag in a picture had. And I think and we didn't actually post anything for them. We just created, like, showed them how to post everything, and they were really excited by the end because they were like, we told them we'll post the first few posts for them, but they were like, okay, no, we want to do it like immediately. We want to jump in. And I think giving them that agency to rather than like just doing it for them, like teaching them like the value of social media, like taking them through like how to do it. I think they were very excited, and right now they've been like posting constantly from their platforms after that day. So I think it was really helpful to do that way.
That's great. Yeah, thanks for that.
Others want to chime in? Cyrus, I have a question while we're waiting for someone else to jump in. You know, it was really interesting to me to see how the project, which was about, you know, mesh networks and sort of larger urban networks, even if located down to a series of just a number of blocks within a mesh. How, not quickly, because you've been working on this project for a while, but once with a specific community partner, became extremely architectural in its spatialization. And I'm wondering if that was a result of the specific interest of the community partner, or the necessity of the moment. But it's interesting to me how the project is sitting right now very much in a kind of the design and to some extent the co-design, but I think the design at the moment, whether a conventional process or not, of a community space, and how you can see sort of bringing that back out and re-engaging what is really, I mean, this organization has a strong social network that occurs digitally, which runs rather counter to the starting point for the project.
Yeah, yeah, I think that we're still very much in the early phases of conceptualizing like what this project could be. I mean, at this point, we're not even sure like which school I think we're going to work with. So there's still very much a lot up in the air. But I think for me, and as I'm approaching this project, I think that was definitely a part of the initial grant proposal.
Right.
And then as the project developed, we sort of followed like Joshua's connections, basically, like to get to David. Like our conversations with him sort of naturally led to connecting us with DCCN. And even though it is more architectural at this moment, because I think that I think speaks to the needs and desires of Third New Hope. I do think that like over time, as this project continues to develop, it would be great to actually fold back in a lot of the mesh network thinking, or at least the neighborhood scale thinking around the projects. It's not just, for me, I don't think it should just be a building. I think it needs to be more infrastructural, and not just digital infrastructure, but really thinking about how social infrastructure and digital technology can like intertwine and support one another. That those two things, that's really what this project is sort of thinking through, is like how those two things can actually work together. And so at the moment, it is about like designing for the building, because it's something tangible that I think that our team and also David, I think, can have a grasp of and have an understanding of. But I think the hope is that as we pin down a site and also start to develop the project, that the scope of it might kind of enlarge a little bit, just to think about the surrounding neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's also, for me, like the pandemic, one of the let's say the pros of the pandemic is that it has disrupted the academic funding cycle. And so just to be another confession, like I was able to get an extension on this project. And so we have another year, like we would have had to present the outcomes of this project like this month. And so that's like, I think the pressure of that, I think sometimes makes it such that you have to work in a certain way. Like I have to walk out of this process with something to show for it. And you're sort of, it's tough sometimes to actually to grapple with that. Like if it's really about, if you're really focused on building a partnership and a relationship with the community, like it's hard to show that effort and that labor. And so I think the sort of plus side of this this moment in time is actually having more time, and actually having more space to figure out like what this project could be, and not be forced into an outcome that fits neatly into the kind of terms of the grant. And I think that's really what, for me, like what this project is, why this project is so exciting, because yeah, it's really about like figuring out how to work with the neighborhood and figuring out how to work with these other organizations.
Yeah, I mean, Maria's gonna chime in a moment, but I'm gonna say two quick things, and then I can see Maria just. I love, this is the one thing I like about Zoom, but I think there are really two important things to think about. One is how it's just really so striking how this moment in time so highlights the interconnectedness of both of social infrastructure and digital infrastructure, right? That first of all, digital infrastructure has become a form of social infrastructure, but it cannot actually it can't replace place-based social infrastructure. And Malcolm has given us some references here. But also, I was just earlier today for my own syllabus work reading Palaces for the People, and reading a book that's all about social infrastructure that was written just a tad before this moment just makes me completely rethink what that's about. But I also think for the students who are in the conversation and some of the faculty, as we begin to have conversations about how to enlarge the footprint of our engagement and how it is we do co-design with communities. I mean, for the students, a confession again on this side, and Cyrus keeps hinting at it, is that the faculty themselves are under a whole host of other pressures based on the thing that's most obvious to students is the semester system, but there's also we have to garner the funding ourselves. We have to help communities garner funding. We do have to publish the work. It's very difficult. If you don't disseminate the work in the appropriate channels, it kind of doesn't count as an academic, which is really one of the pressures of community engaged work in the academic environment. So I think your presentation has been so illuminating in this way for the conversation because of how it brings up all of these disparate, not just the specific question you put out to everybody, but the real ecosystem of doing this work within our environment. And then we have, we're just a little past 6, but I know people are willing to hang, or some are. So I'd like Maria to chime in, and then maybe we can call it, before I ask her to do that, because we still have most people here with us, I want to remind everyone to join us at this time next week for our 3rd professional confessional with Mark Norman from Urban Planning. I wouldn't want to forget to make that shameless plug for being here with us next week. So Maria.
Hey, Cyrus, it was great. Thank you, Sharon. This is a question that is actually coming out of the students. We were in a Zoom conversation before talking about how to bring more community engagement opportunities in the curriculum, also outside of the curriculum. So I'm really curious to have you reflecting a little bit. How is it you think this project will translate if you were to bring it to one of the courses that you teach? Could it be a studio? Could it be a workshop? Could it be a presentation? And then how are you engaging or not the students in the work that you are doing through your research? And again, this is just Maria, but here, you know, the voices of many students asking us to, you know, make these connections more apparent, more visible.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's something that I've been thinking about a lot recently. I think that, you know, some of the challenges I think that I've been facing have to do with, you know, like how to navigate, like how to not make that experience extractive, you know. And I think, you know, it's great, I think, to use the studio space or the seminar space as an opportunity to expose students to this kind of work and doing community engagement work, but also finding ways to be very careful about that, like not using the students' labor to help advance like your own project, but also not using the time and labor of the community partners without compensation. You know, I think that that's like a tricky thing to navigate. And so it really can only happen if you do have like a long-standing partnership with an organization and that you've built that trust with them. And so I think this is a moment, for me at least, where I feel like we have a pretty good relationship with David, where our conversations have been really great. I think maybe in a year, like that's a moment where we could actually we could co-teach a course, or he could be part of that through a workshop, or we could sort of, as this project advances, I think begin to fold in parts of it into the coursework or into the curriculum. But I think it really depends on, as a faculty member, you having a strong partnership with the community, and trust. And it really just comes down to trust and humility. that process? I think it's a great question. I mean, I think it's a really important question because it's something that I think for me at least, requires a lot of like careful thinking so that it doesn't feel, it doesn't feel problematic. Because again, sorry, just to say one more thing, it's like the academic calendar, I mentioned this like many times throughout this talk, and because it's something that I've been thinking about a lot. I think that the academic calendar has this, it's this structure that I think sometimes, exists independent of just real people's lives. And like, I think finding the balance between the kind of bracketing of a semester compared to like the real needs of a community, I think is the challenge with bringing this work into the classroom.
I think that's a really great set of thoughts to end with. So Miriam, really thanks for, for the question, because I think it brings us to a good concluding location. I want to thank everyone for joining on a Thursday evening towards the end of the summer, and safe travels as you move from your screen to your dinner, and maybe a drink. And thank Cyrus in particular for sharing with us, and in the true spirit of the professional confessional. And I hope to see everyone here next week. And Cyrus, Malcolm's link was to a possible academic professional opportunity. If you didn't grab it, I grabbed it for you. So
okay, cool. Yeah, no, I grabbed it. Thanks, Malcolm.
Okay, great.
And thanks everyone. Yeah, this has been really fun. Thank you.
Bye.